This podcast segment is for entertainment purposes only. The views and opinions expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the segment does not imply an endorsement of them or an entity they represent. It also does not reflect the view of imno.expert and any of its affiliated companies or brands. If you have any questions on the disclaimer, please reach out to connect.imno.expert@gmail.com.
Welcome to another episode of I'm No Expert. My name is Jason, and today I have a fellow host of another channel, Aritha Vikramasinghe. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Jason. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yes, you do actually have a show.
I do have a show.
On Pulse?
On Pulse. It's called Stigma, not taboo.
Not taboo. I did I say taboo?
You said taboo.
I just said taboo? Did I?
No, not now.
Okay.
No, earlier, before we started.
Before we started, that's right. So Stigma, it is a show that you talk about specific topics that we don't talk about as a culture.
Yeah. And which are taboo, I guess.
Right. Like, why did you want to start that?
It was actually something which Pulse approached me on.
Okay.
Because on my social media, I used to talk a lot about social issues, which people are not really talking about. And I used to sort of share information on my social media channels on certain statistics and data, primarily around crimes against women, on LGBT issues, child abuse, topics of that nature. And then I used to share stories of people. So a lot of people, especially women, used to write to me about what happened to them, if it was rape or some kind of sexual or physical violence. And I would share those stories anonymously, always with their consent, on my platform. And I got a lot of reach for that work I was doing, the awareness I was raising. And Pulse reached out to me and said, hey, you're sharing all these stories anonymously of people. Why don't we do a show about the issues you're talking about? I said, sure. But I said, one of the problems I have is that we often stigmatize the people who have experienced these horrendous experiences. And
like, can you give me an example? Like, what do you mean we stigmatize them? Like, in our culture, what does it mean for somebody to share a story? Like, do we then just like put them in a certain box? Like, what does that mean? Like, if
so in our culture, it's not just about sharing a story. If a woman is raped, our culture shames the woman who's raped and not the rapist. And if a woman is sexually harassed, our culture questions what she was wearing and why she was walking at a particular place at a particular time, not questioning the man who did the sexual harassment. So that has meant that actually we push, by shaming these victims, by questioning these victims, we push them into silence. And that silence allows perpetrators more space. So we allow the perpetrators to get away because we actually are not questioning them. We're almost justifying their behavior because we're telling the women that they should be more responsible. We're not telling the men that they should not be doing those things in the first place.
Is Sri Lanka safe for women?
Is any country safe for women?
That's good. Okay.
It's very hard to say. I mean, I think generally, yes, it is. It's a safe country in general. But is it safer for women? No, not really. There's a lot of situations in this country which makes it quite unsafe and insensitive towards women.
The reason I asked that is it's important for women that live here, but then also we have this like huge influx of tourists over the past year. Obviously, this is something that can also affect tourism, like about safety, like traveler safety and stuff. There has been a lot of cases online where like people put up videos saying like, oh my God, I'm just like sitting here on the beach. And then all of a sudden we're seeing some people do this stuff. Do you think when we talk about it, that this would actually help affect like the masses? How can you implement this to the masses? Which I know you're doing a lot of work. Nonprofit work that you have been doing that you don't talk about as much, but if you could just share with me like things that we've done, what you've done over the past few years to actually help.
Okay, I mean, on your first part about tourists coming in, I do see it as problematic in the sense that most often our policymakers justify to do something because of tourists. So we want to have better roads, for example, because all tourists may say something. We want to, have street lights because tourists need to see things. we need to be prioritizing our citizens, right? The reason why our streets must be safe for women is because Sri Lankan women must feel safe, not just foreign women who are visiting here. And when it comes to sexual harassment or sexual violence against women, all women should be protected. Our policy should not be designed because we want to ensure that tourists have a better experience here, which is an additional benefit if we actually primarily focus on how do we make Sri Lankan women feel safer and ensure that there's some justice for what they're experiencing. Then automatically, Sri Lankan men or whoever the men are that are doing this to tourist women, they will also stop that kind of behavior. So there is a lot of work we've been doing over the last several years in raising awareness. And introducing new policies and pushing for new policies to address violence against women, both physical and sexual violence. So I have an organization called Pro Bono, and a lot of the work we do is we're a group of lawyers and we provide free legal assistance to people who can't afford lawyers. We do a lot of work in the women's rights space, the child rights space, and the LGBT rights space. We also do, as part of that work, what we realize is there's this disconnect between civil society and lawyers and police officers, because when these crimes happen, you have to engage with the police. Unfortunately, there's been a breakdown in society's relationship with the police. Most often we see the police with suspicion. We don't think the police is going to be on our side. And we feel the police will actually end up persecuting us as opposed to prosecuting the offender. And that is not what the police is there for. The police should be on our side. They were created to be on our side. They were created to protect the victim. But there are very substantial reasons of why we don't see the police in a positive light. So it's been important to work with the police, sometimes to educate them on the law itself. And to educate them on the procedure and to make them sensitive about the issues. So a lot of the time why women who've experienced sexual violence in Sri Lanka don't report to the police is because most often when they have had the courage to report it, they're sent back.
And usually this happens within the household.
This happens within the household, and not just sexual violence, but also physical violence. So every year, about 130,000 cases of domestic violence is reported to the police. And a lot of them, until very recently, the women were sent back to their abusers. And many times, a lot of those women would end up in hospital or sometimes dead. There was a report released by the University of California in 2021, which showed that the biggest killer of women in Sri Lanka was men. And that the majority of women who were killed in Sri Lanka were killed by their husbands or their intimate partners. And a lot of the time, these women had gone to the police to seek help and support, and they were sent back. So the state must take responsibility for the deaths of these women. So through Pro Bono and also a lot of the civil society organizations have been working on how do we strengthen the capacity of the police, of their understanding of these issues, and how can new policies shape the direction they're going in.
Do you ever get, like, whenever there's two ways for somebody to take it, right? Like, for example, if it's police, law enforcement, either they can take it like, okay, you're right, maybe we could rework something and actually relook at how we're operating. Or do they ever get offended? And have you ever like experienced any backlash from talking about this at all?
No, not really. The police has been quite receptive.
Nice.
Maybe because most of the police officers who come for these trainings are women.
Women police officers?
Women police officers. But also the male police officers are also showing a lot of support. So there is understanding. And, we are all sort of ingrained with this, these patriarchal notions of the role of a man and a woman, the role of a wife and the husband, and that, that violence which would happen to women within the family context is a private matter, right? But it's not private matter when your behavior is criminal. When you're abusing someone, that's not a private matter. Now it's a matter of the state. So we need to differentiate that in our heads as well, that violence is not a private matter. It's a public matter. And and any person who's been subject to violence needs justice, but before justice, they need safety. And if personally through their friends or family, if they can't seek that safety, because most often violence happens within the family, then the state must step in to provide that safety.
Right now, this is like reactionary, right? Like this is like somebody's married, there seems to be an issue, like there's violence, it goes to the cops. Is there a way, like I know there's couples therapy, obviously in the Western world, and therapy is like a thing. Here in Sri Lanka, do they ever talk about marriage? Like, is there anything where it helps you actually understand each other? Like, is there some sort of therapy that's available for people to help communicate ideas?
I know some people who've been for couples therapy.
Okay. But not just in Colombo. I mean, like from a bigger perspective of like the whole of Sri Lanka, like, do we have things like that available?
No. I mean, it's just not there. And even, I mean, for example, I met a couple recently who were having issues with their marriage, and they told me they went to see a psychiatrist, and they paid for him. So it did a private consultation with him, and he said, the psychiatrist told them things to do. And I said, how much time do you spend with the psychiatrist? Right. 5 minutes.
Oh, God.
It's like, when you go, when you consult a doctor, you channel a doctor here, you pay them, 3,000-4,000 rupees. And you literally, if you're lucky, you'll get 5 minutes, right? That's the amount of time to spend with you. But a psychiatrist, role of a psychiatrist or counselor is much deeper. It's just not looking at physical symptoms. You should be spending at least 45 minutes to 1 hour at minimum. That's just 5 minutes. So that looked like the best level of service they could find. So no, there isn't any form of counseling for couples.
Because that communication component is such an important part of marriage, right? Like if you don't know how to communicate, and we were just joking around here at the office, we were shooting this show, and we'd written a character in the show of a grumpy old man who we all know that doesn't know how to communicate, that gets mad every time you say something. They're like, I don't want to talk about it. And that's, you kind of see that in a lot of people, a lot of men specifically, that don't know how to communicate. They get stressed at the idea of communicating something, or they can't string a sentence together about a specific topic that's brought up to them in the house. So I feel like maybe it's something to do with, like, first, how do you fix something in that microcosm, and then hopefully it would affect the macro. So I really do think it's like communication within the household before it leads to something like domestic abuse, which is awful.
No, it's very important. And I feel, in some ways, actually, I feel sorry for men because the way we bring up men, not just in our society, but in almost all societies, is that we deny men their expression and we deny men their emotions. Because, it's something I think we've all heard, if you cry as a child, as a male child, you'll say, oh, don't cry like a girl. Only girls cry. I mean, crying is a natural biological reaction. So why are you denying that biological reaction because of some artificially created gendered norm that only women are allowed to cry, but not men? So these sort of microaggressions against young boys, denying their ability to fully be themselves because they have to fit some narrative God knows who has created that men should be like this, boys should be like this. We don't adopt those same narratives and rules for women, although they are affected differently, right? And also affected quite harshly in different ways. But women are not denied their ability to express their emotions and to have close kinships and bonds. So it's okay for girls to sort of be physically intimate as friends with each other, like to hold hands, to hug, to kiss, to go to the toilet together, washroom together, to do their makeup together. Those things are seen as okay. Whereas for a boy or a man, those things are seen as not okay. Right? So that, and we see the consequence of that when you look at the levels of violence perpetrated by the two sexes. Men, the level of aggression and violence perpetrated by men is just exponentially disproportionate to that committed by women.
Yeah.
So we need to look at these root causes, like what is causing men to do this?
Right.
And I think one of those reasons is how we're bringing boys up.
Yeah. It's an interesting thought, because when sometimes I used to just think about, like, if you go down specific areas, you'll see guys holding hands, and it's such an instant thought of like, that's my best friend.
Yeah.
And they're like holding hands and they're just walking down, and you're like, oh, that's cool. But like you said, like in the Western context, I think also it's looked at like separate, like the masculine, the feminine. Whereas I think Sri Lanka, and correct me if I'm wrong, at least outside of Colombo, which is less Western influence, that adoption of the feminine and masculine nature is fluid, right? Like, oh, you guys, my best buddy and I, we hold hands and we swim in the river together kind of vibe is like very normal in that area. But I think here it's kind of like separate. More in Colombo, it's more separated.
Yeah. Although, I mean, it's the sort of gendered expectations of how boys should behave is still prevalent, whether you're in urban or rural parts of the island. So something like a boy shouldn't cry is something which you'll see both in the village as well as in Colombo.
Right. Interesting. So this is not the only, like, everybody knows you for like your activism, for all of the nonprofit work that you do, a lot of that stuff that everyone thinks that's what you do, but that's your actual job is
not that.
It's not that at all. But you're a banking lawyer.
I am a banking and finance lawyer. Yes. Surprise.
Surprise. That's a first. Did you get that? The producer's like, we got him.
I'm actually known more for the work I do for free than the work I actually get paid for.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess that's a good thing.
That is a great thing. It's
not
a
sure how
service.
great that is for my business and for my survival.
It's a service for the country, for sure. That's 100%. So you're a banking lawyer, a finance lawyer, and so you moved to Sri Lanka. You lived in the UK, but you grew up here too.
Yeah, I grew up here.
Before we get into that, though, I'm really curious. How did your parents react when you came out?
Yeah, it wasn't a big deal really. My parents always, I come from a family which we're very close, and we've always been encouraged to be ourselves. So I've been very lucky that way. I mean, neither of my parents they're not university graduates.
Okay.
We're a singular speaking household at home. We don't speak English, and but we were always encouraged to be ourselves and never denied to be ourselves. So when I was a young kid, I have two brothers. So it's a very male-dominated household that way. And my father used to bring us toys like a few times a week when he comes home from the office. And he would always bring my brother's sort of, boys' toys like guns and bows and arrows. But he'll bring me dolls, because I always used to like playing with dolls as a child. And I have a lot of female cousins, and I'll usually, when we hang out with the cousins, I'll hang out with the female cousins or play with the dolls with, their doll collection. So my father used just to bring me dolls. And, one day I complained to him saying, oh, why do you only bring me dolls and you bring the others, my brothers, different toys? So then he brought me like a gun or something one day, a toy pistol. And then he noticed that I wasn't really interested in playing with it. And then he told me off. He said, look, you don't like playing with guns and these things like that. You like playing with dolls. So just play with dolls and I'll buy you dolls. So I think that always gave me this sort of confidence that I can be myself, and that I didn't have to fit in with what a boy is supposed to be like. I don't have to play with those toys. I should play with the toys that I like to play with. So even before I came out when I was 15 years old, but even before I did to my parents, because I first came out to my friends, my brothers, my father called my brothers to his office and he said, look, your brother Arith is a bit different. Some boys like girls, some boys like boys. And my brothers already knew I was gay because we were in the same school. And
you told them, or they just knew?
I think I told them.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a long time. I'm 41 now. And my brother's like, yeah, we know he's gay. It doesn't bother us.
Nice.
So it was just like it was dealt with something like a matter of fact thing.
Right. And your dad kind of picked it up at an early, like he noticed over time. It was like, okay, he's different. And then he just didn't like try to force something on you. He just kept.
No, and even with my mother, and even with my grandparents, you know, my mother sort of grew up all over the country because her father was a civil servant. And when as kids, we used to do these garden parties for our grandparents and our aunts and uncles, where we do all these performances. And it was very normal for us to sort of cross-dress. So, and, you know, we were never discouraged from that kind of expression. So yeah, it was just like, okay, they're just being themselves and we still love them irrespective.
That's amazing. I just feel like it's just super rare. Like that, that's not, I don't hear that story often because you hear more of like, you just don't hear that.
Yeah, you know, and I only realized that when I went to the UK.
Okay.
So when I grew up in Sri Lanka, I grew up in this bubble that, it's fine to be yourself and to be gay. My friends accepted me in school. My principal and teachers accepted me in school. My family accepted me. So I never really had this struggle.
Right.
And I thought it was normal. And when I went to the UK and I was looking back at my country and I was reading the discourse over there, and I realized, my experience wasn't normal. It was some kind of privilege. And that's also where my advocacy comes from, because I don't think it should be a privilege to be yourself. It should be the most basic thing. And it's irrelevant whether you're gay, whether you're a Muslim or Christian or a man or a woman or a transgender person. Everyone should be allowed to be themselves. Everyone should be allowed to live their truth and to be free. You know, these things should not be privileges. And if we are in a society or a culture where something is basic as being yourself is a privilege, then we need to change that culture and that society.
Right. Man, I was literally going to tell you something that I was going to say that you just said that you left to the UK and you noticed that in Sri Lanka, you lived in a bubble. Whereas like for me, I think like whenever I see my friends, like at least in the US is its own thing. Like, I feel like that is its own bubble and the rest of the world is dealing with like real problems in the LGBTQ community.
Yeah.
Like with Sri Lanka, it's like, I don't even know if we still have, suspended that law.
Not that Sri Lanka is in bubble. I'm saying I lived in a bubble.
You lived in a bubble. Yeah.
I'm the one in this privileged
bubble. Gotcha. Yeah, because like Sri Lanka is like, we're still fighting for like these laws from like the 1800s or something, right?
Yeah.
What is that law? Do you know what that is?
So I mean, it's a strange piece of law. So we have a law which criminalizes intercourse against the order of nature.
That's what he says.
Yeah.
It doesn't say homosexuality.
No. So that's also like, that's sort of like the myth that it says, that homosexuality is criminalized or being gay is criminalized. It's not. It actually, if I read the law verbatim, it criminalizes carnal intercourse against the order of nature between man, woman, and animal. So we need to look at, okay, what do we mean by carnal intercourse against the order of nature between man, woman, and animal? It's clear bestiality is covered in it. But we look at the case law. Right, what have different courts in different countries, because the British Empire gave this law wholesale to all of us. What have those courts interpreted it?
Yeah.
And it criminalizes certain types of sexual conduct. So courts have held, yes, it criminalizes anal sex. But courts have also held that it criminalizes oral sex. So when Singapore repealed the law, their argument was that they were repealing the law which criminalizes oral sex between consenting adults. Because in Singapore and in several other countries, a lot of ex-girlfriends and ex-wives of men were complaining to the police that their husband or partner made them perform oral sex on them.
Okay.
So a lot of straight men were actually getting prosecuted and jailed for getting a blowjob.
Wow.
So they're like, okay, we need to get rid of this law because we cannot get a blowjob now. And then there's another judgment which said that, Thai sex is also covered. And there was another
Did you say Thai sex?
Thai sex, when you put your penis between the thighs of someone else.
Oh, Thai sex. That's new. Have you guys ever heard of that? Thai sex?
Yeah, in Sinhala we call it gal kapana.
That's what it means?
Yeah.
Oh, I've been using that wrong. Oh, no. Wow. Okay. Dang. Okay.
And there was one absurd judgment which said that mutual masturbation is also intercourse against order of nature.
Mutual masturbation.
So the whole premise of the law, which one quotes, is that any form of sex without a reproductive purpose is intercourse against order of nature.
Right.
And so even when the court held mutual masturbation was included, the court said when you're masturbating someone and the penis goes through your hand, that's intercourse.
Oh.
And because you cannot reproduce when you masturbate with someone, that is intercourse against order of nature.
Gotcha.
So literally, like every one of us is a criminal under this law.
Right.
But unfortunately, it has historically been used more against the gay community primarily.
Okay.
Because it's a easier conviction to make, say, oh, you're okay, therefore you cannot reproduce, therefore you are a criminal.
Right.
But there's no specific mention of homosexuality.
And this is again a reminder that this is a law by the British when we were under colonial rule.
It is. And it's really time for it to go, because really, I mean, do we want to be debating in front of a judge? Do we want a judge to be looking into whether between a man and woman, right? So it criminalizes any form of sexual activity which doesn't have a reproductive purpose. So really, should courts be looking into whether you were masturbating your husband or your wife, whether you were wearing contraception? Technically, using condoms could be legal under this law, because you clearly cannot reproduce.
Right.
And selling condoms could be aiding and abetting the commission of a crime.
Right.
So it really leads to many absurdities. These laws were passed at a time before contraception was even envisaged. So why do we even have them anymore?
Right. That is interesting. Do you ever think this law will be passed where they kind of abolish that?
Yeah, I'm hopeful for it. I mean, it was very close to being passed last year.
Yep. I was talking to Rosanna Flamo Caldera as well, and she was like, it's there, but I'm also like, I don't trust that it'll get there. Yeah,
unfortunately, it didn't. It had 2 readings, one more reading to go, but then elections came about, so it couldn't go through. It is in the manifesto of this present government.
Oh, cool.
So I hope they fulfill their manifesto promise.
Right. That's very interesting. And now going back, I had to derail because I was very curious to see how parents can actually help kids process what they're going through. And that's an important thing. But going back into your banking. So this is what you do. What is your take on Sri Lanka's rapid recovery with our economy? And I mean, it looks like we're doing pretty good and we're on a pretty good path. What was your take during this whole economic crisis and how we've just bent over backwards to sort things out? Shoot me your take.
I think we've had a remarkable recovery. It's I would say it's a recovery which has not been seen, at least in recent history, in many other countries which have gone through an economic crisis similar to ours. When you look at, for example, Greece and many European countries which were affected by the 2008, 2009 great financial crisis, a lot of those countries still have not recovered. So when you look at their GDPs, Greece, even the UK, their GDP today is still less than what it was in 2007. So nearly 20 years ago. So 20 years later, these countries are still below what they were in terms of wealth. Whereas Sri Lanka, we're almost on track to going beyond our GDP, which was in 2018.
Right.
So, and the way we've grown from, we had a deep recession in 2022, like negative 7.5%, probably even greater than that. and we had 5% growth last year. We've had an appreciating currency. We've had inflation come down from 100+% to now, we're in deflation territory, right? We're negative inflation. It's unprecedented how we have recovered from this, and that's really something to be proud of.
Yeah. When do you think this started, like the recovery phase? Because I know we were in a pretty bad spot. I think the worst this country's ever seen. When do you think that started? Like for us to actually start, like in your opinion, to starting to see like, okay, Sri Lanka's actually starting to move in a good direction. It's not good right now, but it's starting to move.
I think from towards the end of 2023, we started moving in a good direction. That's because a lot of the policies and laws which were passed from 2022 and early 2023 started sort of taking impact. I think one of the fundamental things we did was making the central bank independent. A lot of our financial crises can be blamed for the sort of boom bust money printing cycle of the central bank,
right?
Which is to finance government's debt, right? So it's like a tap, and that tap has now been shut. And so the central bank is no longer obliged to finance government debt. So create artificial money. If the government wants to borrow money, that's fine, but they need to borrow their money from real sources.
Right.
So either from people's savings in Sri Lanka or from people's savings outside of Sri Lanka. They can't rely on sort of, a printing press to create that cash for them.
Right.
Which is what drives inflation, which is what drives currency depreciation. So stopping that, making the bank independent is a fundamental thing which really changed a lot of things.
What I know you're currently doing, and I'm not going to say anything specific, but you're currently involved in numerous amounts of things. What can Sri Lanka expect, at least in terms of recovery and in terms of like our economic growth? Are we going to see more tourist boom? Are we going to see more buildings come up? Like what are we seeing? Is inflation going to go down? Are we going to be able to actually buy some cheese and not break the bank?
I mean, I think inflation is already quite down. Yeah. In fact, we're in deflation. So officially prices have been falling, not rising. So I actually think we do need some inflation because some inflation is good for the economy. Deflation is actually not very good for the economy.
Okay.
And I'll tell you why, because consumption is a major part of economic growth, right? You have to go buy goods. And when you buy goods, you give people, you put in money into the economy. There's money being generated. More wealth can be created through consumption. But when you have a deflationary environment where prices are continuously declining, then there's a disincentive for you to buy your goods today because you are hoping that the price will be even cheaper later on.
Right.
And so that can actually have a negative impact on growth overall because it negatively impacts consumption. So, for example, Japan been having a deflationary crisis for nearly like 20 years.
Okay.
And that's why Japan has never really recovered from the boom of the of the 80s and early 90s. So we don't want to be in that situation. So some inflation is good. So I hope because of the government's desire and the central banks need to create some inflation, that interest rates will come down further. And that's good overall for the economy because when interest rates come down, we spend more, things become in a way more affordable as well. You'll be able to buy a house, buy a car, or you'll be able to borrow to spend for something else.
Right.
I expect the economy to continue its path of growth. And as long as we stay on the course.
Yeah. I think the main question I get is because we live in two different countries, is like buying a car here is just, everybody knows it's yeah. That's a great way to put it. It's crazy.
I have not driven in 15 years and I don't have my own car.
That's fair. Sri Lanka is a different ballgame. I call traffic in Sri Lanka compared to driving in America. America is it's an algorithm, right? It's binary. It's like 0, 1, you stop, you go, you stop, you go. An open road. In Sri Lanka, I compare it to the ebb and flow of the ocean. You kind of like, you got to flow. You got to, the bike is coming. You got to flow. You got to let him, he's coming really close to your car. You got to let him flow. So it's like driving in Sri Lanka is a different ball game, but in order for you to even get there, it takes a lot because your taxes are what now, 600% or something like that.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. Yeah.
When does that come down? How does that come down? When will that come down?
I think obviously we had for nearly half a decade banned any imports of vehicles, right? So it was a 5-year ban. We're just lifting that ban. I think the intention for the government was they did not want to. There's a huge pent-up demand for cars, for vehicles. It's 5 years of pent-up demand, and annually Sri Lanka would spend about nearly $1 billion a year in importing vehicles. So their fear was that all of the pent-up demand would suddenly mean that a lot of money would be spent on importing these vehicles.
Right.
So the import restrictions were lifted, which is a positive thing. The taxes were increased just in order to control the demand. And I would expect that in the next year or two, we'd see these taxes decline.
Oh, cool. So there is hope.
Yeah, as once demand gets managed and once there's a steady flow of vehicles, these taxes should naturally be coming down.
Gotcha. That's cool.
And the reason why, I never bought a car here is because I just did the math that, when I first moved here, I looked at my annual Uber Pick Me bill, and I realized that my annual Uber Pick Me bill was 10 years of my annual Uber Pick Me bill would be how much it takes me to buy a Wagoner, right? A big car as basic as that. That's just to purchase it.
That's for people watching, that's like a box car. It's just a little box car.
Yeah, it's a box car.
Yeah.
So that's 10 years of my Uber bill.
Yeah.
And that's just to purchase the car. That's the cost of purchasing the car. Then plus doesn't include the fuel, the insurance, all of that. So it's like, it makes zero financial sense for me to be buying a depreciating asset.
Yep.
I'd rather use this money and invest it somewhere. So that's what I do. And I use Ubers and Pick-me's, and I use the money I would have bought on cars on my financial growth and stability.
That makes sense. Do you ever see public transport being improved in the country?
Yeah. And I actually use public transport quite a lot. And there is a plan. There is a new World Bank program to modernize the bus sector, at least.
Hey.
So, to restructure of how bus services work in Sri Lanka, how licenses are issued.
Nice.
And so there is a program. It's just starting off.
Yeah. Remember that ebb and flow I was talking about traffic? Well, the buses are the sharks.
Yeah. They are a law unto themselves. They're actually a public hazard.
It's dangerous.
They are dangerous.
Crazy
but
stuff.
That's also because of how the bus sector was liberalized in Sri Lanka and how the licensing route permit system works.
Oh, tell me about that. I don't know.
In most countries, bus districts or any district, you have one company with one set of timetables running the bus services for that district. In Sri Lanka, any individual, so you could have a bus, and you would tell the authority, okay, I'm going to bid for this route, and you pay the license fee, and you get a route permit to run your bus on that route. So in Sri Lanka, almost all the private buses are owned by individual owners. So every bus has a different owner.
Wow.
And they all got these route permits, most of the time competing with each other on the same route.
No.
So that's why they're all driving like maniacs.
Because they're trying to beat the other bus to the stop.
Exactly.
That makes so much sense to me now.
And it's become so dangerous as a consequence. So we need to rationalize how this works and restructure it. So move towards cluster bus companies and move towards bus companies as opposed to individually owned buses.
That's wild. That's news to me. Did you guys know that? No? That now I know. That makes so much more sense. That's interesting. So wait, you travel by bus?
Yeah, I travel by bus.
Do you enjoy it?
Yeah, I really like traveling.
You do?
I really like public transport.
Yeah.
I do. My husband doesn't, so he complains when I'm traveling around with him. Then he insists on taxis. But I really like, because my husband lives in Gaul.
Okay.
So usually Thursday evenings, I take the bus down to Gaul.
Nice.
And either I take the bus back up or I take the train back into Colombo on Monday. But yeah, I really like it. I think most of it is great. And it's, it's just one person. It just makes sense for one person to drive a car 100 something kilometers.
Yeah.
It's not good for the environment. And yeah, it's also not good for your pocket. So
Fair enough. You mentioned your husband. How did you get married here in Sri Lanka?
we did not get married here.
Oh.
We got married in London.
Right. And
Yeah.
so is your marriage, like, does that count in Sri Lanka, or like, how does that work? Like, so you get married somewhere else, you legalize your marriage, but then you come to Sri Lanka, and then is it like still considered legal, or?
Yeah, I mean, Sri Lankan law and policy does recognize a legal and valid marriage of another country.
Right.
Right. So there is nothing in our policy which says otherwise. And in fact, the Sri Lankan immigration services, they do offer spouse visas for same-sex spouses who are married in foreign countries. And interestingly, also our marriage registration law does not even define marriages between a man and a woman.
Okay.
Because in Sri Lanka, we have different types of marriage, right? So we have the Muslim marriage law, where a man can marry 4 wives.
Right.
And you have, the Thesavalami law. There's a different type of marriage. You have the Kandyan marriage law, and there are 2 different types of marriage there. So you can't really define a marriage in Sri Lanka as between a man and woman, because there can be many women sometimes. So the marriage registration law of Sri Lanka actually defines marriage as any marriage. It's a very secular definition, actually.
But it's never been done here.
It's never been done here, no.
Right.
Yeah, but maybe it will in the future.
Yeah.
But right now it hasn't. And also because we got married in the UK and our marriage registration law was introduced during the colonial period, it expressly recognizes a marriage of the United Kingdom as a Sri Lankan marriage. So I was very smart when I was choosing the location of my marriage.
Yeah, that is smart. Man, you really are a lawyer. Look at you go. Well, this has been awesome, man. This has been fun. I really learned a lot from this pod, especially about like our laws. It's very interesting, from buses to the colonial laws that define sex. It's mind blowing. Did you guys learn a lot?
Yeah,
I did.
I think we need to sort of, we claim to have become independent in the 40s, but I don't think we properly decolonized yet. So we need to go through that exercise of going through a lot of that colonial legislation and really decolonize, kind of remove ourselves from those shackles.
Yeah, we're from our side as filmmakers and in advertising and stuff. Like we're working on that component of like, we see a lot of like favor in terms of lighter skin means better. And so, our job is to like fight that and just be like, hey, like our people are beautiful, like your beauty, you don't have to be light skinned to be beautiful. And that's what we see. You see the trickle down effect from all of that stuff. So
I actually ran that campaign against Fair and Lovely.
Oh, nice.
And pushed for them to rebrand.
So what did they rebrand to?
So now they're called Glow and Lovely. So yeah, it was it was during when the Black Lives Matter movement started. And then of course, there was these, all these brands started saying, yeah, we support racial justice, we're against discrimination. And then I just sort of went on the attack. The new CEO of Unilever had posted this message on that. And I just went on the attack on him, saying, I'm sorry, you've earned billions of dollars over the last few decades with products like Fair and Lovely, telling brown and black people of this world that they need to be white to be better. And you still have these products on sale. And now you're saying you stand for racial justice and non-discrimination based on skin color. Like you literally made money out of it. So we put together this team. There was a Miss America there was a makeup artist from Canada, and we sort of ran this campaign against Unilever, against whoever does Nivea, to end. I mean, our main goal was to end Fair and Lovely,
right?
Because that's a curse which many of us have grown up with.
Yeah,
and I even exposed at the time this issue which happened to the editor of Cosmopolitan magazine in Sri Lanka, where when she was editor, Unilever sent her a package of some whitening creams and asked her to post it on her personal social media to promote it. And she refused to do that. And she then instead posted the image of those products with the names cut off and said, brown skinned people should be celebrating their skin, not wanting to be whiter. And Unilever Sri Lanka actually went on an attack against the editor of Cosmopolitan Sri Lanka for this, to the extent that they told her to not just withdraw that, but to apologize for it in the magazine. And that for 6 months to run editorials on the benefits of skin whitening creams. And when she told me this story, I was mortified. And luckily, just a few months before, I had dinner with the global CEO of Unilever in London. So I knew him on a somewhat personal level, and we were in touch. So then I shared this story with him. I said, look, this has happened. And I said, this is definitely not the person who I think you are. These are not your values. And I hope these are also not your company's values. And in that particular case, he took action on the individual concerned, all of that. But then I also told him, you know, the fact that this happened in the first place, right? These large white-owned corporates have been in brown and black countries, really threatening brown and black people. Like someone as high status as the editor of Cosmopolitan, you know, being threatened to promote their skin whitening products, and to have the nerve to do that. You know, what gave you that permission to do that? So I told him, I also hope you stop this apartheid of skin whitening. And then it was only a year later, the Black Lives Matter movement happened. And I said, yes, we need to exploit this situation to end this apartheid. And I told like Miss America, you know, at the time, I said, look, you have to lead it from the US and from Canada, because the Indians and Sri Lankans have been campaigning against this for a long time, but they won't listen to our voices. So you have to lead it there. And it worked. So they finally ended it. They call it Glow and Lovely, and that's fine, you know.
Do they still advertise here in Sri Lanka?
They do, but the style is very different. It's about empowerment. When they relaunched it, it was all with a darker skinned woman. You know, the whole thing was about empowerment. So a complete rebrand.
Right. That's great.
But the damage is already done. You know, people have moved beyond Fair and Lovely. They're injecting themselves. They're throwing bleach on themselves, right? So, but this is the brand which did create all of this. It exploited the hangover of colonialism. It made billions of dollars. It was their most successful product. So now, yes, they've rebranded and they're whitewashing what they did, but you've done the damage.
That's wild. It's for me, it's just seeing, at least they took a step towards now the next generation that grows up in Sri Lanka doesn't really see that component anymore of like, oh, I need to be lighter skinned to look beautiful.
No, I think they still see it.
Really?
Now the influencers are doing it. There are other brands out there who are doing it. You know, so it's there. It's too late. You've unleashed this monster. Now what we need to work on is from a young age, build confidence in young children that your skin color is great. You don't need to be whiter to be beautiful. You don't need to be whiter to get a job or have friends. These are the kind of ads we grew up to for Fair and Lovely. So we need to really change that at school level.
And like within the household as well, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Artha, this has been a pleasure, man.
Thank you.
This has been
Thanks,
awesome.
Jason.
I really enjoyed our conversation. Did you guys enjoy your conversation? How do people find you on social media and Instagram and stuff?
How do they find me on social media? You can find me on Instagram. It's aritha.w.
Awesome. Well, we'll definitely have you back. Would love to have you back and keep talking more about the developments and the stuff that you're working on. Obviously, we're not going to talk about too detail about the things that you're involved in, but excited to know more, and we'll have you on the next one.
Great. Thanks for having me. I look forward to coming again.
Awesome, brother. Thank you.
Thanks.